Vanessa's fork hit the edge of her wineglass, sharp and intentional. The room went quiet. She smiled like she owned the table and said, "Let's raise a glass to my dear mother-in-law, Evelyn, who just left her job again for health reasons." Then she added, slow and sweet, "Tell us, Evelyn, how does it feel to be unemployed again? To be a loser at your age?" Nobody said a word. My son looked away. I sat still, calm. But in that moment something shifted. Because the woman mocking me didn't know the house she lived in, the one she flaunted on social media, belonged to me. Not to her, not even to my son, to me. And what I said next changed everything. If you've ever stayed quiet when someone crossed the line, this story is for you. The dining room looked perfect that night. The table was set with polished silver, candles and glasses that sparkled under the light. It was Daniel's 35th birthday, and Vanessa had made sure everything looked expensive and elegant. She liked to show people that she had taste. I just sat there at the end of the table watching everyone talk and laugh, waiting for the evening to be over. I'm Evelyn Harris. I'm 64, I lost my husband 2 years ago, and since then, I've been trying to adjust to a quieter life. I used to work as a financial investigator for the FFIB, but I left my job a few months ago because of health issues. Vanessa thought that made me weak, maybe even useless. We were halfway through dinner when she tapped her fork against her wineglass. The sound was sharp and deliberate. Everyone went silent. She was smiling, looking around the table as if she were about to make some grand speech. "Let's raise a glass," she said loudly. "To my dear mother-in-law, Evelyn, the most experienced unemployed woman I know." A few people gave awkward smiles, but no one laughed. Daniel stared down at his plate. I could feel the heat in my chest, but I kept my face calm. Vanessa enjoyed the silence too much. She loved having control of the room. She continued, her voice sweet but cutting. "You've had such an interesting few years, Evelyn. Leaving jobs, coming back, leaving again. I just think it's brave, you know? Not everyone can start over again and again at your age." The guests looked uncomfortable. One woman reached for her drink and pretended to be fascinated by the bubbles in her glass. Someone coughed quietly. Daniel whispered something to Vanessa, probably telling her to stop, but she ignored him. She kept going, her smile getting wider. "I just hope when I'm your age, I still have your confidence. Most people would be embarrassed, but you—" She gestured toward me with her glass. "You make it look effortless." There was nothing kind about her words. Every sentence was meant to sting. She wanted to humiliate me in front of Daniel's friends. I looked at her and saw exactly what she wanted, to make me look small so she could look important. I took a slow sip of wine and placed my glass back down. "Vanessa," I said quietly, "you should probably enjoy that drink. You're going to need it after what I'm about to say." Her smile froze, but she still tried to laugh it off. "Oh? And what's that supposed to mean?" I looked at Daniel first. His face was pale, confused. Then I looked back at Vanessa. "You've been calling this house yours for years," I said, "posting pictures online, redecorating, telling everyone how proud you are of your home." "Yes," she said, blinking, still trying to sound casual. "Our home. What about it?" "It's not yours," I said. "And it's not Daniel's either. It's mine." The room went completely silent. I could hear someone put down their fork in the next room. Vanessa's expression changed instantly. "What are you talking about?" I kept my voice steady. 3 years ago, when you and Daniel were looking for a place, you couldn't qualify for a mortgage because of his student loans. I bought this house. I paid for it in full with your father-in-law's life insurance. You've been living here as tenants ever since." Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came out. Vanessa blinked several times, trying to process it. "That's not possible," she said finally. "You said—" "I never said anything," I interrupted. "I wanted you both to have a chance to stand on your own, but that doesn't give you the right to insult me in my own home." She laughed, but her voice cracked halfway through. "You're making this up." "You can check the property records tomorrow morning," I said. "They're public. My name is the only one on the deed." No one moved. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Vanessa looked around, desperate for someone to say something, but no one did. Daniel's friends avoided eye contact. They had seen enough to understand what was happening. Vanessa's voice trembled now. "You can't just throw us out." "I can," I said, standing up slowly. "You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live." She stared at me, pale and speechless. Daniel finally spoke, but his voice was quiet. Mom, is this true? Yes, I said simply. You've been paying me rent all along. You just didn't know it. Vanessa stood there frozen, gripping her glass so tightly I thought it might break. Her lips were pressed together, her face drained of all color. I looked at her one last time and said, "This conversation is over. Good night." I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. Behind me, no one spoke. Even the air felt still. When I stepped out of the dining room, I finally let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. That was the night it all started. The night my silence ended. And trust me, this was only the beginning. I set my glass down carefully. The sound of it touching the table was sharp enough to make everyone stop breathing. Interesting, I said slowly. It's quite something, being called a failure. In a house the person talking doesn't even own. The air turned solid. You could feel it, the weight, the confusion, the curiosity. Vanessa gave me that smile again, the one that never reached her eyes. "What are you talking about?" she said, half laughing, trying to sound amused. I looked around the dining room. Every corner of it was familiar. The cream curtains she'd picked out, the chandelier she had posted online with some pretentious caption about her dream home. Every inch of this place carried her fingerprints, but none of it carried her name. "This house," I said, still calm, "was bought in cash with my husband's life insurance. It's under my name. I'm the only owner." The sound of Daniel's fork hitting his plate was loud in the silence. He looked at me, his voice quiet, unsteady. "Mom, what are you saying?" "I'm saying, Daniel, that when the bank refused your loan because of your student debt, I stepped in. You both thought I co-signed. I didn't. I bought the house. Every payment you've been making for the past 3 years hasn't been for a mortgage. It's rent." Vanessa blinked a few times, then let out a small laugh that didn't sound natural. "You're kidding." "I'm not," I said simply. The guests looked from one person to another, unsure whether to move or stay frozen. The room was so quiet you could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. Vanessa's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her glass again, trying to act unaffected. "You can't be serious," she said, her voice sharper now. "You can't just decide something like that out of nowhere." I leaned back in my chair and looked her in the eye. "It's not out of nowhere. It's been this way from the beginning. You've been living here rent-free for months. I think it's time that changes." Vanessa stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You can't do that. You can't just throw us out." "I'm not throwing you out," I said quietly. "I'm ending the lease. You have 30 days. That's the law." Daniel was sitting perfectly still, staring at his plate like he didn't recognize it. Vanessa turned toward him, desperate. "Daniel, say something. She can't do this." He didn't look up. He didn't say a word. I stood and smoothed the front of my navy dress. "I suggest you start looking for somewhere that fits your actual income, Vanessa. Something a little smaller, maybe. Something more realistic." She looked like she might scream, but no sound came out. I could see her chest rising and falling, her breath quick and uneven. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for someone, anyone, to take her side. Nobody did. One of Daniel's colleagues cleared his throat softly. His wife stared at her plate, pretending to adjust her napkin. The others followed her lead. "You can't just ruin our lives like this," Vanessa said finally, her voice shaking. "You're being cruel." "Cruel?" I said. "No. I've been kind. I've let you live here, eat at my table, insult me in my own home. That's over." She swallowed hard. "I'll fight this." "Then fight it," I said, picking up my purse. "Just make sure you start packing while you do." For a long moment, no one moved. The candles flickered in the quiet, and I could feel every pair of eyes on me as I walked toward the door. Daniel whispered, "Mom." But I didn't stop. I turned back just once, enough to see him sitting there between his angry wife and the truth he didn't want to face. "You'll understand someday," I said softly. Then I walked out. My heels clicked against the tile, steady, certain. Behind me, I could hear Vanessa's voice breaking into fragments, half anger, half disbelief. "She can't do this. She can't." No one answered her. When I reached the hallway, I finally let out a long breath. My hands weren't shaking anymore. They hadn't been since the moment I decided I'd had enough. It wasn't anger that drove me. It was something colder, clearer, the realization that silence had protected the wrong people for too long. That night, I didn't sleep much. I didn't cry either. I sat by my window, looking out at the lights from the houses nearby, and thought about what would come next. I knew Vanessa wouldn't let it end quietly. People like her never do. But whatever came after that dinner, I was ready. The phone rang at 7:15 the next morning. I had been awake for a while, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. When I saw Daniel's name on the screen, I knew the call was coming. "Mom, what was that last night?" he asked. His voice was tired, flat, like he hadn't slept either. I took a breath before answering. "It was the truth," I said quietly. "I bought this house to help you start your life again. I kept it under my name because I've seen too many people lose everything when they trusted the wrong person." He didn't say anything right away. All I could hear was the sound of him breathing on the other end, the kind of breath someone takes when they're trying to hold something in. Guilt, anger, confusion. I wasn't sure which. "Vanessa says you did it to control us," he said finally. "She's wrong," I answered. "I did it to protect you. There's a difference." He sighed, and I could picture him running a hand through his hair, the same way he used to when he was a boy who'd gotten into trouble and didn't know how to explain himself. "I just wish you'd told me," he said. "I wanted you to feel like you could stand on your own," I told him. "Your father and I always believed in helping without taking away pride, but I see now that sometimes silence can be mistaken for weakness. Maybe that's my fault." There was another pause. I could almost hear him swallow hard. "You embarrassed us in front of everyone," he said. "No," I said calmly. "Vanessa embarrassed herself. I just told the truth. And if the truth humiliates her, maybe she should ask herself why." He didn't respond. I waited. Finally, I said, "Daniel, I know you love her, but love doesn't mean letting someone walk all over the people who raised you. If she can talk to me that way in front of others, she'll talk to you that way when no one's looking." "I don't want to choose sides," he said quietly. "You don't have to," I told him. "This isn't about sides. This is about respect, about what's right. I won't be part of a house where cruelty is treated as humor." The line was silent for a few seconds. I could tell he was thinking, searching for something to say that wouldn't make things worse. "You always find a way to make everything sound reasonable," he said, half frustrated, half resigned. "Because I've lived long enough to see what happens when people ignore the signs," I said. "You're my son. I'll always love you. But I won't let anyone, not even you, let that woman tear down everything your father and I built." He didn't answer. I thought he might hang up, but then he said, "I need time to think." "Take it," I said softly, "but don't let her do the thinking for you." When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. The sun was coming through the window, lighting the edge of the kitchen counter. The house was quiet, too quiet, and for the first time I felt the weight of what had started. Last night wasn't just a dinner argument, it was a line drawn in a place I could never erase. And now I knew. This wasn't just a fight between a mother-in-law and her daughter-in-law. It was something much bigger. It was a fight between truth and lies. That afternoon, I was sitting in the living room, reading the paper and finishing a cup of tea, when I heard a car pull up outside. I didn't have to look to know who it was. The sound of her quick steps on the porch was enough. A few seconds later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there she was, Vanessa, dressed in a cream-colored yoga outfit, holding a bouquet of half-wilted flowers. Her face looked calm, but her eyes told a different story. She had spent the night thinking about what happened. "Evelyn," she said softly, forcing a smile, "I came to apologize." I stepped aside and nodded toward the living room. "Come in." She sat down carefully, placing the flowers on the coffee table like a peace offering. I went to the kitchen and poured tea. The smell of jasmine filled the air, calm but tense. I could feel the weight of her presence even when she wasn't speaking. "I didn't mean to embarrass you last night," she started. "I was stressed. My studio hasn't been doing well, and with everything going on, I guess I just snapped." I handed her the tea. "Your studio?" I asked. She nodded quickly. "Yes, the one I've been building for 2 years now. It's been hard to get clients." I sat down across from her, watching her closely. "You mean the studio where you take pictures every day but never seem to have a single student in them?" Her smile faltered. She tried to laugh it off. "Well, social media isn't everything. I'm still trying to grow." "Right," I said quietly. "And how much money have you and Daniel put into this business?" She hesitated, glancing down at her cup. "Maybe 15,000. Equipment, marketing, insurance. You know how it is when you're starting something." I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch until she looked up. Then I said, "You've spent $15,000 on something that doesn't make money while living rent-free in a house worth $500,000. Do you see the problem here?" Her face tightened. "Evelyn, I came here to apologize, not to be judged." I stood up and walked over to the desk in the corner. I opened a drawer and pulled out a folder filled with printed screenshots. I placed it gently on the table in front of her. "Do you know what these are?" I asked. She looked at the pages, confused. "What is this?" "These are social media posts from people who tagged you in their private yoga sessions," I said. 23 posts, all from wealthy neighborhoods, all showing you teaching in their homes. You claimed you have no paying clients. You told Daniel the business makes no money, but here you are, collecting cash from people who can afford to pay." Her face went pale. "Those are just friends," she said quickly. "They're helping me practice." "Friends who pay you in cash?" I asked. "Do you report that income, or does it disappear somewhere before tax season?" She was silent. Her hands were trembling. I could see her throat move as she swallowed. "I've worked in financial investigation for 32 years, I said quietly. "I can tell when someone's hiding something. You may think I'm an old woman who doesn't understand social media, but I understand money better than anyone you've ever met." Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. "You can't prove anything," she said finally, her voice shaking. I sat down again and looked at her straight in the eyes. "I don't have to prove anything, Vanessa. I haven't done a thing. But I could, and I will, if you ever speak to me the way you did again." She opened her mouth to respond, but I kept going. "You've spent years pretending to be something you're not. A successful entrepreneur, a perfect wife, a victim when things don't go your way. You use Daniel's kindness like a safety net. That ends now." Her shoulders dropped. "Evelyn, I didn't mean—" I raised a hand to stop her. "I don't care what you meant. What matters is what you did. You humiliated me in my own house. You lied to my son. You've built your life on excuses. I won't let you do it here anymore." She stared down at the floor. I could see her nails digging into her palm, the only sign of her anger left. I reached for my cup and took a slow sip. The tea had gone warm, but I didn't mind. "I'm not your enemy," I said, "but I'm also not your doormat. You don't have to like me, Vanessa, but you will respect me. And if you ever forget that, I'll remind you in a way you won't forget." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of the clock on the wall filled the room, steady and cold. Finally, Vanessa stood up. "I should go," she said quietly. "Yes," I said. "You should." She hesitated by the door. "Are you going to tell Daniel?" I met her eyes. "No, not yet. He'll find out when he's ready, but don't mistake my silence for mercy." She didn't reply. She just nodded, opened the door, and left. When the door closed, I sat back down and looked at the steam rising from my tea. It moved slowly, curling in the air before fading away. For a moment, I just watched it, calm but alert. That conversation hadn't solved anything. It had only drawn another line between us, one that wouldn't fade easily. Vanessa thought she could charm her way out of trouble. She didn't realize she had just stepped into a different kind of fight, and I was done being quiet. It was late. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy. I was in the kitchen putting the kettle on when I heard the knock on the door. I didn't have to ask who it was. When I opened it, Daniel was standing there. His face looked tired, his hair messy, and his eyes unfocused. He hadn't been sleeping well. I could see it right away. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Of course," I said. He sat down at the kitchen table, his shoulders slumped. I poured him a cup of tea, the same way I used to when he was a kid and couldn't sleep after watching a scary movie. Only this time, the fear wasn't about monsters. It was about real life. "Vanessa said you threatened to report her to the IRS," he started. His tone was controlled, but there was tension under it. "If she wasn't lying about her income," I said, "there wouldn't be anything to report." He rubbed his forehead and sighed. "Mom, this is getting out of hand." "No," I said quietly. "It's been out of hand for a long time. You just didn't want to see it." He didn't respond right away. I could see him wrestling with what to say. I handed him the tea and he wrapped his hands around the cup like he needed the warmth. "Do you know how much she's really making from her so-called yoga business?" I asked. He shook his head. "A few hundred a month, maybe?" "Try 24,000, I said evenly. "All cash." He looked up sharply. What? She's been teaching private lessons to wealthy clients. She gets paid under the table and doesn't report a cent of it. You've been living on your teacher's salary while she hides her money. You think that's fair? He didn't answer. His lips tightened and he looked away. I just wanted to keep the peace, he said after a long pause. I'm tired of fighting. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, things would calm down. Keeping the peace with lies, I said softly, isn't peace. It's surrender. You're slowly killing your own sense of right and wrong, one silence at a time. He took a long breath and looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly. I didn't know what to do, he said. Every time I tried to talk to her about money, she cried or said I didn't believe in her. That's how people like her work, I said. They turn guilt into a weapon. They make you feel cruel for wanting honesty. He looked up at me, eyes tired. Why didn't you tell me about the house sooner? About everything? I thought I was protecting you, I said. I thought giving you a chance to stand on your own would make you stronger. But maybe I should have told you the truth earlier. Maybe I should have trusted you to handle it. He leaned back, silent again. The only sound was the soft whistle of the kettle cooling behind me. When I was younger, I said quietly, I made a mistake. I once worked with a man who was stealing from the company. I found out, but I didn't say anything. I told myself I was being kind, that maybe he needed time to fix it. But he didn't. And when it all came out, I lost my job. He walked away with a promotion. I looked him straight in the eyes. That's when I learned something, Daniel. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you peace. Sometimes it costs you people you care about, but you do it anyway. Because living with the truth hurts less than living with guilt. He swallowed hard, blinking back tears. You've been carrying that alone all this time? I nodded. I thought I was doing the noble thing by forgiving, but forgiving people who don't want to change isn't noble. It's enabling. He covered his face with his hands for a moment, and his voice cracked when he spoke again. I let her talk to you that way. I just sat there. I should have said something. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. You're not a bad man, Daniel. You're just a man who wants peace in a world that doesn't give it easily, but peace built on lies doesn't last. He looked up at me, eyes red. She said you hate her. I don't hate her, I said simply. I hate what she's done to you. I hate that she's turned your kindness into weakness. You can love someone and still see the truth about them. He didn't say anything for a while. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Then, finally, he whispered, I've made a mess of things. No, I said, shaking my head. You just lost your way. But it's not too late to find it again. He nodded slowly, tears finally falling. I don't know how to fix it. One step at a time, I said. Start by seeing things as they are, not as you wish they were. The rest will follow. He looked at me, and for the first time that night, his expression softened. You always make things sound so simple, he said quietly. It's not simple, I said. It's just necessary. He let out a shaky laugh, then covered his face again. I don't deserve you. You're my son, I said. That's enough. He wiped his eyes and stood up. Thank you, Mom. I smiled. You don't have to thank me. Just remember what I said. He nodded and headed for the door. I watched him go, the sound of his steps fading down the hallway. When the door closed, I stayed there, staring at the cup of tea he'd left half full. It was cold now, untouched. But for the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe he had heard me. Maybe something had shifted. That night, I realized that sometimes love means standing firm, even when it breaks your heart. It was around 10 in the morning when I heard the sound of a car door closing outside, the kind of sound that made me stop what I was doing. I looked through the window and saw a black BMW parked in front of my house. The woman who stepped out looked exactly like someone who thought the world owed her respect. Perfect hair, sharp heels, expensive clothes that didn't move unless she did. Margaret Cooper, Vanessa's mother. She wasn't alone. Another woman came with her, dressed in a navy suit, carrying a sleek leather folder. They both walked toward my porch with the confidence of people who believed they were about to win an argument before it even started. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. Mrs. Cooper, I said. Margaret smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Evelyn, we need to talk. Of course, I said, stepping aside. Come in. They entered the living room like they were walking into a courtroom. Margaret didn't sit right away. She stood looking around the room, at the furniture, the photos, the curtains. "It's nice to see you've kept the place so well," she said finally. "Vanessa's put a lot of time and energy into this home." I sat down. "I'm sure she has. She's had plenty of free time to do so." Margaret's smile didn't fade, but her tone sharpened. "Let's not pretend, Evelyn. What you did the other night was unnecessary and cruel. My daughter has worked hard to make this house feel like a home. She's cared for it, improved it, invested her effort, and you humiliated her in front of everyone." I folded my hands in my lap and kept my voice calm. "I didn't humiliate her. I told the truth. There's a difference." The other woman, the one in the suit, cleared her throat. "Mrs. Harris, I'm Patricia Lang. I'm here as a legal advisor for Mrs. Cooper." I nodded politely. "Go ahead." She opened her folder. Under state law, long-term occupants who contribute to the maintenance or improvement of a property can establish certain rights. Vanessa has lived here for 3 years. She's made significant improvements: interior design, landscaping, repairs. It could be considered partial contribution toward ownership. I looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "And all of that was paid for with whose money?" Patricia hesitated. "Well, I assume joint household income?" "No," I said evenly. "Every renovation, every piece of furniture, every can of paint was bought with my money. Vanessa hasn't spent a single dollar of her own on this house. She's been living here without paying rent for the last 3 years. If she wants to call that a contribution, that's an interesting interpretation." Margaret crossed her arms. "That's not how we see it. My daughter has managed this household. She's taken care of it like it was her own. That should count for something." I met her gaze. "It does. It counts as a gratitude, the kind she hasn't shown once." Her jaw tightened. "Evelyn, you're being small-minded. You're punishing her for a single comment made out of stress. She's been helping Daniel, helping this home. You should be thanking her, not threatening her." "Helping Daniel?" I repeated. "She's been hiding money from him. $24,000 in unreported income. You might want to ask her about that before you start talking about what I should be thankful for." Patricia frowned. "That's a serious accusation." "It's not an accusation," I said calmly. "It's a fact. I have records, screenshots, social media posts, client statements. I spent 32 years investigating financial fraud. I know how to recognize it when I see it." For the first time since she arrived, Margaret's expression shifted. It wasn't anger anymore. It was doubt. "You're exaggerating," she said, but her voice wasn't as strong as before. I stood and walked toward the desk by the window. I pulled out a small folder and placed it on the coffee table. "You can read it yourself. Or you can wait until the IRS does. They might find it more interesting than you do." Patricia glanced at the papers without touching them. "Mrs. Harris, this isn't the way to handle family matters." I smiled slightly. "No, this is the way to handle fraud. Family matters ended when your daughter called me a loser in my own dining room." Margaret stood up quickly, her heels clicking against the floor. "You think you're untouchable because you're old and bitter, but you're not. You're just jealous of my daughter." I looked up at her, steady. "Jealous? No, Margaret. I pity her. And maybe I pity you too, because you raised her to believe that cruelty is confidence." The silence after that felt long and uncomfortable. Patricia shifted her bag and gave Margaret a look that said they should leave. I walked them to the door. Margaret turned around before stepping out. "You'll regret this, Evelyn. You're pushing her too far." "I'm not pushing her," I said. "I'm showing her boundaries she's never had. Maybe that's the problem." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't scare me with threats about the IRS." "I'm not threatening," I said quietly. "I'm just giving you a heads up. It's better when visits from government agencies don't come as a surprise." She froze for a moment, then turned sharply and walked down the path, her heels hitting the pavement hard, one angry step at a time. Patricia followed behind her, saying nothing. When they left, the house was quiet again. I went back to the kitchen and poured myself another cup of tea. The steam rose slowly, the air smelling faintly of jasmine. Through the window, I watched Margaret's car pull away. Vanessa was in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead. Even from a distance, I could see her hands trembling in her lap. She wasn't angry anymore. She was scared. And for the first time, I knew she finally understood what she was dealing with. A few days passed quietly after Margaret's visit, but I knew that peace wasn't going to last. Vanessa had gone quiet too, which worried me more than her usual noise. Silence from someone like her never meant calm. It meant she was planning something. That's when Clara Nguyen showed up at my door. Clara lived 2 houses down. She was in her late 50s, sharp as a knife, and had worked for the county land office before she retired. I'd known her for years, mostly through small talk over fences and borrowed garden tools. She was the kind of woman who saw everything but never said a word unless she needed to. I made us tea and we sat at my kitchen table. The air smelled faintly of lemon and paper. "I heard about what happened with Vanessa," she said carefully. "I'm sure the whole neighborhood has," I said. Clara gave a small smile. "Maybe. But I'm not here for gossip. I think I can help." I looked at her, unsure what she meant. She leaned forward slightly. "I still have access to some public databases. Old contacts. I can look into a few things if you want me to." "Like what?" I asked. "Property records, business licenses, maybe some financial filings. Nothing illegal, just what's public. If Vanessa's been moving money or hiding assets, there might be traces." I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but be careful, Clara." She smiled again. "I don't get caught. I just get answers." For the next few days, Clara worked quietly. She didn't tell me much until she was sure of what she found. Every evening, she would text me a short update, a name, a date, a screenshot. By the 3rd night, she came over with a folder. We sat at the same table again, the yellow kitchen light reflecting off the wood. She opened the folder slowly, sliding a few printed pages toward me. "Here's what I found," she said. "Vanessa's been running a pattern, and it's not just unreported cash." The first page showed a list of GPS locations. "I pulled these from her social media tags," Clara said. "She claims these are yoga sessions, but the locations match addresses of private homes in the wealthiest part of town. The same 5 clients every week for almost a year. It's regular income, not random jobs." I stared at the list. The dates lined up perfectly with the days Daniel said she was teaching classes. Clara turned to another page. "These are cash deposits, not in her joint account with Daniel, but in a separate one under her name. She's been taking cash payments, then moving them through different banks, small amounts at a time to avoid attention." I felt a cold heaviness settle in my chest. "She's laundering money," I said quietly. "Essentially, yes," Clara said. "But that's not the worst part." She flipped to a photo printed from a social post. Vanessa was in a fancy restaurant, smiling across the table at a man. The caption read, "Lunch meeting with my favorite client." "That man," Clara said, pointing at the picture, "is named Ethan Wallace. He owns a construction company, married. No business connection to her studio. Yet she's met him 7 times in 2 months, always during her supposed client hours." I looked at the photo longer. There was something too familiar about the way Vanessa looked at him, the same smile she used to charm everyone around her. "She's not just lying about her income," I said finally. "She's living a double life." Clara nodded. "Exactly." She handed me another page, this one showing business registry information. Ethan's company recently transferred several assets, cars, investment accounts, even part ownership of a small property, into a new name. That name belongs to someone named Vanessa Wallace, registered 6 weeks ago. I blinked. "Wallace?" Clara's eyes met mine. "Yes, the same last name as Ethan." The room felt smaller suddenly. "So she's been using his last name?" "She might even have married him," Clara said. "There's a record of a marriage license filed in Nevada. I can't confirm it yet, but it looks real." I sat back trying to process it. The idea that Vanessa, who still lived under my roof, could have married another man under a different name made my stomach twist. Clara spoke softly. "I don't think Daniel knows any of this." "Of course he doesn't," I said. "She's been playing him from the start." For a while, neither of us said anything. The clock ticked faintly in the corner, steady and cold. I looked at the papers spread out on the table, the addresses, the deposits, the photos. Each one was a piece of a puzzle that formed a picture uglier than I had imagined. "She's clever," Clara said finally. "Most people would have missed it. But she's sloppy too. She posts too much. She wants to look important. People like that always leave trails." I nodded slowly. "She thinks she's untouchable. That's her mistake." Clara leaned back, folding her hands. "What are you going to do?" "I'm not sure yet," I said. "But one thing's clear. She's not just lying to my son. She's committing crimes in my house. Clara's face softened. You could go to the police. Not yet, I said. I want to be sure. I want her to know that when I expose her, there won't be a single doubt left. Clara gathered the papers and slid them into a new folder. I'll keep digging. There might be more. Maybe financial transfers or property changes. If I find anything else, I'll bring it straight to you. Thank you, Clara, I said quietly. I owe you one. She shook her head. You don't owe me anything. Sometimes good people just need someone who's willing to look closer. After she left, I sat there for a long time. The house was dark except for the soft blue light from my laptop screen. I opened it and started scanning the files again, one by one, the pictures, the names, the dates. The blue glow reflected off the glass of the window, and I caught my reflection in it. My face looked tired but steady. My hands didn't shake anymore. Vanessa thought she was safe because I was quiet, because I looked like someone who'd given up the fight, but she was wrong. This time, silence was my weapon, and I wasn't done. It was early evening, and I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone buzzed on the counter. I wiped my hands and glanced at the screen. The message popped up from Vanessa. Can't wait to see you tonight. Daniel's working late again. For a second, I just stared at it, not understanding. Then the meaning sank in and my stomach dropped. The air felt colder somehow. I read it again, slowly, hoping I had misunderstood. But there was no mistake. My daughter-in-law had just sent me a message meant for someone else, someone she couldn't wait to see while my son was at work. I typed back a short reply. You sent this to the wrong person, Vanessa. I didn't have to wait long. 3 minutes later, the doorbell rang. Loud and desperate. When I opened the door, Vanessa was standing there, her hair messy, her face pale, eyes wide with panic. She had clearly run all the way from wherever she'd been. Evelyn, she gasped. Please, I can explain. I stepped aside and motioned toward the living room. Come in. She walked past me, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. Her breathing was still uneven. I swear, it's not what you think, she said quickly. I think you sent a message to me that was meant for someone else, I said calmly. Someone who isn't my son. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked like a cornered animal, trying to figure out which direction to run. Who is he, Vanessa? I asked. She shook her head. It's no one, just a friend. You know how text messages can get mixed up. No, I said quietly. They don't. Not like that. You said, can't wait to see you tonight? Daniel's working late again. That's not something you text a friend. Her eyes filled with tears that didn't look real. Evelyn, please, you have to believe me. Things have been difficult between me and Daniel. I've just been confused. I made a mistake. I kept my voice even. Does he know about this mistake? She swallowed hard, looking down at the floor. No. And the man you're seeing, I continued, does he have a wife? Vanessa froze. That silence was all the answer I needed. I nodded slowly. So, 2 families. Yours and his. She looked up suddenly, desperate. Please don't tell Daniel. I'll end it. I swear I will. I wasn't thinking. It doesn't mean anything. I took a step closer. You've been lying about money. You've been hiding cash. You've been pretending to run a business that doesn't exist. And now you're sleeping with another man, probably one of your clients. You tell me, Vanessa, what part of that means nothing? Her lower lip trembled. I don't know what you want me to say. I don't want you to say anything, I said. I want you to think about what happens next. She blinked rapidly, tears finally falling now. Real ones this time. Please, Evelyn, I'll fix this. I'll make it right. You can't fix what's already broken, I said. The only thing you can do is tell the truth. To Daniel, tonight. Her eyes widened in panic. No, please. He'll never forgive me. You can't tell him. Please, I'm begging you. I'm not going to tell him, I said, and she looked up with sudden hope, but I didn't let it last. You are. Either you tell him yourself or I will. You have until tomorrow morning. She shook her head, voice trembling. You're blackmailing me. I'm giving you a choice, I said evenly, to take responsibility for your own actions. Something you've never done before. She pressed her hand against her mouth, her body shaking. He'll leave me, she whispered. Maybe he should, I said quietly. Maybe that's the only way either of you will learn something from this. She turned toward the door, then hesitated. Evelyn, please. If you ever cared about Daniel, you won't ruin his life like this. I'm not ruining his life, I said. You already did that. I'm just making sure the truth comes out before it gets worse. She stood there for a moment longer, breathing hard, before finally walking to the door. When she turned the knob, her hand was shaking. I spoke one last time before she left. Vanessa, I want you to understand something. I'm not angry because you hurt me. I'm angry because you've turned my son's love into a shield to hide behind. And that stops now. She didn't look back. She opened the door and stepped outside, closing it behind her. When the sound of her footsteps faded, I stayed where I was, staring at the door. My hands were steady. My heart was not. I went back to the kitchen and poured myself another cup of coffee. It had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. The taste didn't matter. I looked at the phone still lying on the counter, the message glowing faintly on the screen. Can't wait to see you tonight. Daniel's working late again. I locked the screen and set it down. Through the window, the sky was turning gray, heavy with clouds. Somewhere outside, Vanessa was probably crying, or maybe trying to come up with another lie. Either way, I knew what was coming. The silence wouldn't last long, and the next storm was already on its way. 3 days went by after that message, and the house stayed unnervingly quiet. Vanessa didn't show up, didn't call, didn't even try to talk to me or Daniel. For once, her silence felt heavier than her words. I knew she was trying to find a way out, but I also knew she had run out of lies to hide behind. That morning, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Clara was standing there, holding a thick folder in her hands. Her face was serious, tighter than usual. "Evelyn," she said, "you might want to sit down." We went into the kitchen. I poured her some tea, but she didn't touch it. She set the folder on the table and looked straight at me. "I found something," she said quietly. "You remember I told you I suspected she might have married that man, Ethan Wallace?" I nodded. Clara opened the folder and pulled out a few documents. The top one was a copy of a marriage certificate. "It's confirmed," she said. "Vanessa and Ethan Wallace got married in Nevada 6 months ago." For a few seconds I couldn't speak. I just stared at the paper, my mind blank. "She's married," I whispered. "Yes," Clara said softly. "Legally married, while she's still married to your son." I felt something cold spread through my chest. That's bigamy," I said. Clara nodded again. "It is." I leaned back in my chair, trying to process it. It didn't feel real. I thought I had reached the limit of what she was capable of, but I had been wrong. "That's not all," Clara continued. "Ethan's company, Wallace Construction, has transferred several assets into her name since the wedding. Money, stock shares, even one of their properties in Reno. Everything was moved quietly over the last 6 months. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. So, she's been living here with my son, while taking money and assets from another man she secretly married." Clara nodded. "Yes, and according to records, Ethan filed for divorce from his wife shortly before the marriage. His ex-wife's name is Sarah. She lost a large portion of their joint assets in the settlement, assets that went to Vanessa soon after." I shook my head slowly. She knew exactly what she was doing. "There's more," Clara said, her voice lowering. "Rosa, my cousin who works at the county office, helped me look deeper. Vanessa has legally changed her name twice in the last 5 years. Before she was Vanessa Cooper, she went by the name Veronica Case. There are civil records showing she was sued for fraud under that name." I looked up, shocked. "Fraud?" "Yes," Clara said. "Credit fraud and identity manipulation. She settled privately, so it never made the headlines. But it's all there in the files." The clock on the wall ticked loudly. The sound seemed sharper now, echoing in the room as I sat there in silence. I looked down at the papers again. The marriage certificate, the business documents, the court records. Each one was like a blow. I thought about every time she smiled at me across the dinner table, every sweet tone she used when she wanted something, every fake apology she made. I thought about the way she had called me a loser, so certain that she was above me. All this time, she hadn't just been cruel, she had been calculating. Every word, every action, every compliment had been part of a plan. "She's a professional," Clara said softly. "She targets families, wealthy widows, single sons, anyone she can manipulate." I nodded slowly, still staring at the papers. "She didn't fall into this by accident," I said quietly. She built it, step by step. Clara took a sip of her tea now, finally. Evelyn, I don't think she's acting alone. Ethan might be in on it, or maybe he's another victim. Either way, this goes beyond one lie. I didn't answer right away. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was holding. The proof that my son's life, his marriage, his trust, had all been part of a scheme. Finally, I said, "She's not just a bad daughter-in-law. She's a criminal." Clara nodded. "Yes. And she's dangerous." I let out a long breath. I should have seen it. The signs were there. The constant lies, the obsession with money, the way she'd never let Daniel make any real decisions. "You couldn't have known," Clara said. "She's done this before. She knows exactly how to make people doubt their instincts." I looked down at the marriage certificate one more time. My name wasn't on it, but somehow it felt personal, like an insult carved in ink. "I need to protect my son," I said quietly. "He doesn't deserve this." Clara's eyes softened. "He'll need to hear it from you, Evelyn, but you should be ready. This will break him." "I know," I said, "but better a broken truth than a perfect lie." I sat there for a long time after she left. The house was silent again, but it didn't feel like peace anymore. It felt like the calm right before a storm hits, the kind you know you can't avoid. I picked up the marriage certificate and looked at it under the kitchen light. My hands were steady now, but my eyes burned. Vanessa Cooper, Vanessa Wallace, Veronica Case. 3 names, 1 woman, 3 lives built on deception. A tear rolled down my cheek before I even realized it. It wasn't for me, it was for Daniel. For the years he'd spent loving someone who never really existed. For a long moment I just stood there, holding the paper like it might change if I stared hard enough. But it didn't. The truth doesn't bend. And now there was no turning back. It was Thursday afternoon when I heard the knock on the door. It wasn't rushed or polite, just steady, firm. I wiped my hands and opened it. A woman stood there holding a badge. "Mrs. Harris?" she asked. "Yes." "I'm Detective Hannah Reed, Financial Crimes Division. May I come in?" Her tone was calm but professional. She looked like someone who'd seen more lies than she could count, and didn't waste time on small talk. I stepped aside and let her in. We sat at the dining table, the same one where everything had started weeks ago. She took out a folder and placed it on the table, her eyes scanning the room quickly before focusing on me. "We're conducting an investigation into a series of financial and marriage-related crimes," she said. "The primary suspects are Vanessa Cooper, also known as Veronica Case, and Vanessa Wallace, and Ethan Wallace." I nodded slowly. "I was expecting this." She raised an eyebrow. "You knew?" I didn't know, but I suspected. My neighbor, Clara Nguyen, and I gathered some documents. You'll find a lot of what you're looking for here. I got up, walked to my desk, and brought over the thick folder Clara had helped me put together. Photos, transaction records, screenshots, messages, everything that proved who Vanessa really was. Detective Reed opened the folder and began flipping through the pages. She didn't look surprised, just focused. "This is very thorough," she said. "You did some of our work for us." I gave a small shrug. "I used to work for the FFIB. Old habits die hard." She looked up, a faint smile crossing her face for the first time. "That explains it." Then her tone turned serious again. "We've been tracking Vanessa and Ethan for several weeks. The case began when Ethan's ex-wife, Lauren Wallace, filed a complaint. She reported that her ex-husband had committed bigamy and transferred marital assets illegally to another woman, your daughter-in-law. I felt a tightness in my chest, even though I already knew the answer. "Lauren Wallace," I said quietly. "She must have lost everything." "Almost," Reed said. "She managed to freeze some of the transfers before they went through. That's how the investigation started. But once we began digging, we realized this wasn't an isolated case." She took out another sheet from her folder and slid it across the table. It was a list of names. "Your family," she said, tapping the paper gently, "is the 7th we've identified. Vanessa has targeted families like yours for more than 2 years. Widowed parents, adult sons with stable income, predictable financial behavior. She picks them carefully, earns their trust, and then drains them." I looked at the list. 7 names, 7 families. I didn't know them, but I could imagine every one of their stories, mothers, sons, maybe even daughters, all fooled by the same woman. 7 families, I repeated. "And mine was the 7th. Detective Reed nodded. The last one, as far as we know. I sat back in my chair. Then I suppose it ends here. Reed studied me for a moment. You don't seem surprised. I'm not, I said quietly. I've spent years chasing people like her. I just never thought one would end up in my own home. She leaned forward slightly. We'll need your cooperation, Mrs. Harris. We already have enough to charge them with bigamy and financial fraud, but your documentation helps us build the federal case. You'll have whatever you need, I said. She nodded, making notes. Do you know where Vanessa is now? No, I said, but if I had to guess, she's with Ethan. Reed flipped through a few pages again, her eyes focused. You're probably right. We have surveillance indicating they met 2 nights ago at a hotel outside town. We've already obtained a warrant. They won't get far. The words didn't bring joy, exactly, just a quiet kind of relief. She continued, Your son, Daniel, he'll be contacted as part of the victim group. I know this won't be easy for him. We can assign a counselor if needed. I nodded. I'll tell him. He deserves to know everything now. Reed gathered the papers into a neat pile, then looked up again. Mrs. Harris, you should know something. We found evidence that Vanessa had begun researching your family almost a year before she met your son. Background searches, social media activity, even notes about your husband's insurance payout. This wasn't random. You were chosen. I felt my jaw tighten. She hunted us. Yes, Reed said, but thanks to you, it stops here. For a moment, the room was silent. The light from the window fell across the papers between us, and I realized that the same table where she'd once mocked me was now the place where her crimes were being documented. Detective, I said quietly, I just want this to be over. I don't care about revenge. I just want my son to be free. Reed closed the folder and stood up. It will be, Mrs. Harris. You've done the right thing. She reached for her jacket, but before she left, she paused by the door. You know, she said, most people don't fight back when they're deceived like this. They hide, they're embarrassed. But you gathered evidence, you stayed calm, and you told the truth. That takes strength. I gave her a small smile. Strength is easy when you've already lost everything once. After that, there's nothing left to fear. She nodded respectfully. We'll be in touch soon. You'll want to be here when we make the arrests. After she left, I stood by the window, looking at the street outside. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. A few minutes later, the low rumble of engines broke the quiet. Unmarked police cars pulling up along the street. Their headlights flashed briefly across the living room walls. I didn't move. I just watched, my heart steady. It wasn't excitement I felt, just closure. The kind that comes when truth finally catches up with lies. Through the curtains, I saw the reflection of blue and red lights against the glass, flashing softly, steadily like a heartbeat. I whispered to myself, 7th victim, and the last one. Then I turned off the kitchen light and sat down by the window. Outside, the faint glow of police lights washed over the street, and I knew that justice, quiet, patient, and relentless, had finally arrived. It was just past 6 in the morning when the sound of knocking broke the silence. Not a soft knock, not the kind you ignore. This was hard, sharp, and final. The kind of sound that tells you something is about to change. I was already awake, sitting by the kitchen window with my first cup of coffee. The air was still, the world outside quiet except for the sound of that knock echoing through the house. Vanessa appeared at the top of the stairs, her hair messy, her silk robe hanging loose around her shoulders. She looked half asleep, half confused. Evelyn, what's going on? She asked, her voice hoarse. Before I could answer, another knock, louder this time. Open up, this is the police. Her face went pale. She froze for a second, then turned toward me. Evelyn, what is this? I didn't say a word, I just looked at her. She knew. She must have known. She walked to the front door and opened it slowly. 2 officers stood there, one male, one female. Behind them, an unmarked car waited by the curb. The morning sun was rising, the light sharp against the edges of their uniforms. Mrs. Vanessa Cooper, the female officer said, her tone firm and practiced. You are under arrest for financial fraud, bigamy, and conspiracy to commit identity theft. Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked from one officer to the other, her voice finally breaking through the shock. This is a mistake. she said, shaking her head. You don't understand. I can explain. The officer didn't move. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. As they spoke, the other officer stepped forward and pulled her hands behind her back. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the hallway. The morning light hit the cuffs, making them glint like something colder than steel. Daniel appeared at the bottom of the stairs, barefoot, his shirt wrinkled, eyes wide with confusion. What's happening? He asked, looking from me to Vanessa to the officers. Vanessa turned to him, panic in her voice. Daniel, tell them. Tell them this is a mistake. He looked at her, then at the officers. A mistake? His voice was low, shaking. They're saying you married someone else. The female officer spoke again. She did. We have legal documentation of her marriage to Ethan Wallace in Nevada, dated 6 months ago. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. He stared at Vanessa, his face drained of color. You married him? Vanessa was crying now, or trying to. It's not what it sounds like, Daniel, please. He stepped back. Not what it sounds like? You married another man while living in this house. With me, with my family. You lied to everyone. She tried to move toward him, but the officer held her back. Daniel, please, I did it for us. I was trying to help us, I thought. He shook his head slowly, disbelief, written all over his face. No? You did it for yourself? You've been doing everything for yourself. The officers started leading her toward the door. She struggled for a moment, her voice rising. Evelyn, please. You can stop this. Tell them this is a mistake. You know me. I stood still. I know who you are, I said quietly, and that's exactly why I won't stop them. She looked at me one last time, eyes full of something between rage and fear. Then the door opened, and the morning light flooded in. The sound of birds outside mixed with the steady voice of the officer reading her rights. Daniel stood frozen by the stairs, watching as they led her to the car. He didn't say another word. The car door shut with a heavy thud and the engine started. Through the window, I saw her face one last time. Pale, drawn, her lips moving but no sound reaching me. Then the car drove away, turning the corner until it disappeared. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just the sound of the clock ticking and Daniel's quiet breathing. He finally turned toward me. His voice was barely a whisper. She really did it. She actually married him. Yes, I said softly. And she deceived you both. He sank into the nearest chair, putting his hands over his face. I didn't move. I couldn't comfort him, not yet. The truth needed space before comfort could mean anything. The room was filled with morning light now, brighter, almost too bright. I walked to the window and looked outside. The street was empty again, calm as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt a quiet sense of release. It wasn't joy. It wasn't victory. It was something simpler, peace. Daniel looked up at me through tired eyes. What now? I met his gaze. Now we start over, I said. This time, without lies. He nodded slowly, though I could see the hurt still sitting heavy in his chest. I turned back toward the window, my voice low but steady. Justice doesn't need applause, Daniel. It just needs to be done. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, spilling light across the street, catching the reflection of the fading police lights. It looked like the day was beginning again, clean, quiet, and honest. And for the first time, I believed it might be. 3 months later, we sat in courtroom 4B, waiting for the trial to begin. The room was packed. Reporters filled the back rows, and quiet whispers moved through the crowd like ripples. Daniel sat beside me, his shoulders tense, his hands locked together. I could feel the weight of everything he'd been carrying, shame, anger, confusion, all mixed into one long silence. When the bailiff called for order, everyone stood. The judge entered, calm and unreadable. Vanessa was led in moments later, handcuffed, wearing an orange prison uniform that made her look smaller somehow. Her hair was tied back, her face pale and still. She didn't look at us. She didn't look at anyone. The prosecutor began reading the charges: bigamy, financial fraud, tax evasion, and asset misappropriation. Each word landed heavy one after another, like stones dropped in water. For a while, I didn't look at Vanessa. I just listened. Every detail confirmed what I had already known, but hearing it out loud made it real in a way that paper never could. When they called witnesses, Lauren Wallace took the stand first. She looked strong, tired, but strong. She spoke clearly about how Ethan had transferred their assets, how Vanessa had appeared in her life like a shadow that wouldn't leave. Her voice didn't shake once. When her testimony ended, she turned slightly in her seat and looked toward me. Our eyes met for a brief second. She gave a small nod and whispered, "Because of you, I can look at myself in the mirror again." I nodded back, unable to speak. Next, the prosecutor presented evidence: the bank transfers, the marriage certificates, the property deeds, and finally, the folder Clara and I had built together. My handwriting was visible on the edges of a few pages. Seeing it there, under courtroom light, felt strange, like watching a piece of my private pain turned into public record. Daniel's hand trembled slightly beside me. I reached over and took it. His fingers were cold. He didn't look at me, but he didn't pull away either. For the first time in a long while, we sat like we used to, quietly, side by side, holding on. When it was Vanessa's turn to speak, she stood up slowly. Her lawyer had told her to remain silent, but she asked to address the court. The judge allowed it. "I never meant to hurt anyone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to start over. I made mistakes, but I'm not a bad person." No one said a word. The silence in the courtroom was heavier than any judgment. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Mrs. Cooper," she said evenly, "you didn't just make mistakes. You made choices, deliberate, calculated choices that destroyed families. This court will hold you accountable for each one." Vanessa lowered her eyes, and for the first time I saw something that might have been regret. Or maybe it was just exhaustion. The judge shuffled through the papers in front of him and spoke clearly. "Vanessa Cooper, also known as Veronica Case, and Vanessa Wallace, this court finds you guilty on all counts. You are hereby sentenced to 8 years in federal prison." The sound of the gavel hitting the block echoed through the room, sharp, final. Daniel exhaled softly, the air leaving him like he'd been holding it in for months. I felt his hand tremble again. I tightened my grip, the way I used to when he was little and afraid of thunder. Across the aisle, Lauren sat still, eyes closed, one tear slipping down her cheek. The prosecutor began gathering her files. The courtroom slowly filled with the quiet sounds of people standing, shuffling, whispering, the world moving on. One case closed, another beginning. Vanessa turned once before the officers led her away. Her face was blank, unreadable. There was no anger, no hatred, just emptiness. For the first time, I realized that maybe this was who she truly was underneath it all, a hollow person who had spent years pretending to be someone real. The guards took her by the arms and guided her toward the door. The light from the high courtroom windows fell across her shoulder, sharp and cold. When she stepped past the line of sunlight, it caught her briefly, a flash of gold against the orange uniform, and then she was gone. The door closed. The judge spoke again, his tone calm. "Court is adjourned." People began to leave. Daniel stayed seated. "It's over," he said quietly, more to himself than to me. I looked at him. "Yes," I said. "It's over now." We stood slowly. He put a hand on my shoulder, and for the first time in months, I saw something different in his eyes. Not anger, not guilt, just peace. As we walked out of the courtroom, the sunlight from the hallway spilled across the floor, bright and clean. For a moment, I stopped at the door and looked back one last time. The benches were empty now. The papers had been cleared. Only the faint echo of the gavel remained. Justice doesn't come with applause. It doesn't need witnesses or celebration. It just needs to be done. And as I stepped into the light, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not victory, not revenge, but a quiet kind of freedom. For Daniel. For me. For all the lives that woman had broken and all the ones she couldn't anymore. The sound of the courthouse doors closing behind us was soft, but to me it felt like the sound of something beginning again. 3 months had passed since the trial. The house was quiet now. The kind of quiet that didn't feel empty, just peaceful. The white curtains moved gently with the breeze from the open window. Morning light spilled across the kitchen floor, warm and soft. Daniel had moved into his own apartment downtown. He'd started teaching again at the community school. Every Sunday, he came by for dinner. He looked healthier now, tired sometimes, but lighter, like he was finally learning how to breathe again. As for me, I had been reclaiming my space, one small piece at a time. I cleared out the things Vanessa had left behind, The decorative clutter, the unnecessary noise she had filled the house with. Then I went back to the garden. The soil was dry at first, lifeless from neglect, but a few weeks later the roses began to bloom again. Red, white, and yellow. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed the smell of fresh earth. One afternoon, Clara stopped by. She came through the back gate with her usual easy smile and a small box in her hands. "Apple tarts," she said, "still warm?" We sat at the patio table, the same spot where she had once shown me those terrible papers months ago, but today, the air felt lighter. "You know," she said between bites, "I've been thinking. You have all this experience, finance, investigation, life. Have you ever thought about teaching again? Maybe not in a classroom, but something smaller?" I raised an eyebrow. Teaching what? Managing money, building independence. I have a few friends, widows, older women. They're smart, but they've spent their whole lives depending on someone else to make decisions. They could use someone like you. I thought about it for a while. The idea sounded strange at first, but not unpleasant. "Maybe it's time," I said. "Maybe I can help them find their footing." Clara smiled. "I think that's exactly what you're meant to do." When she left, I stood by the window for a while, looking out at the garden. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting shifting patterns on the ground. It was so simple, just light and wind and quiet. But somehow, it felt like healing. Later that week, I called the local community center. They were more than happy to lend me a small room for Saturday mornings. Nothing fancy, just a few chairs, a whiteboard, and a pot of coffee. The first class started with only 5 women. Some were widows, others recently divorced. They looked nervous when they came in, like they weren't sure they belonged there. I understood that feeling well. I started simply talking about budgeting, protecting savings, and understanding the basics of financial independence. But before long, it wasn't really about numbers. It was about courage, about how you start over when life takes more than you thought you could survive. When the session ended, one woman stayed behind. She said, "I thought I was too old to start again, but hearing you talk made me think maybe I'm not." I smiled. "You're not," I said. "You're right on time." As they left, I stood by the door looking at the small whiteboard with my name written at the top. Evelyn Harris, Financial Confidence for Women. For a moment, I just let that sink in. I wasn't the woman they once mocked for being unemployed. I wasn't a victim of someone else's lies. I was a teacher again, a guide, a survivor who'd turned her pain into something useful. When I turned off the lights and looked back at the room, the morning sun poured through the windows, washing everything in gold. And I thought to myself, losing everything isn't the end. Sometimes it's the only way to find who you really are.